Good afternoon and welcome to the Common Sense Quarter. Today is July 20th, 2014. We have a very exciting show today. We have Rob Watson with us, who is a member of the USA Freedom Army. He's joining us from Illinois, and he's going to be speaking about what it's like to be a member of the U.S. Freedom Army and what it is their missions and objectives are. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Good. I see that you have the setup where you actually look like this is your radio show or talk show.
Yeah, I'm gradually accumulating all of the trappings of having a radio show with the hopes of someday doing my own, but we'll see.
Okay. So what have you been doing in the radio venue so far? So maybe we can get some audience to ensure that they're following you.
Well, this is my kind of my debut. I have gathered quite a following on Twitter. It's more of a modest following, but I've been getting a lot of tweets and retweets on the U.S. Freedom Army things that we've been posting, and we're just looking to get more members and get more help with that. But eventually, I would like to do some audio portion, maybe a weekly show or something that has to do with U.S. Freedom Army.
Okay. Well, you say we have been
hmm
doing things with the U.S. Freedom Army. Tell
hmm
us who the we are and what the U.S. Freedom Army is.
Well, the U.S. Freedom Army is about as grassroots as it gets. We're not funded by the Koch brothers or any of that nonsense. It started out with a gentleman by the name of Louis Shoup. He wrote a book. He was inspired by some of the events of the past decade or so to write a book about, kind of a presidential diary of what a president might write about if he were in office and we're dealing with some of these crises that we're dealing with. And from there on, he decided that he was going to do a little bit more than that, and he decided to found U.S. Freedom Army. And so he's posted a website and started using Twitter and recruited a bunch of people, and I'm one of those folks that he recruited. At first, I was skeptical. I wanted to find out if it was some kind of a front for, spying on American citizens and entrapping them into doing something they wouldn't normally do. But after my thorough questioning, I have trust issues, so I have to check these things out. After my thorough questioning of him and getting to know him, I realized, no, he's the real deal, and he's just a concerned American, just like the rest of us, and looking to try to improve things for our country. So I just went on his website, signed up, and said, what can I do to help? And so I've been kind of helping to push that out.
So, Louis, what did Rob have to say to you to gain your confidence and your trust?
I don't know if Lewis is on the call.
No, I was asking you what Louis said to you.
Oh, you're asking me. I thought you called me Lewis. I was like, okay. Yeah, no. What he said to gain my confidence was essentially that he was, he was just a person like me, and it was just the back and forth pattern of our communication indicated to me that he was definitely, on the up and up and on the level. He and I are both software, hardware engineer type people.
Okay.
I looked over his profile. We talked over email several times, and his goals are actually quite modest for the organization, which I found to be somewhat disarming in the face of many other organizations that are trying to do too much. He's trying to just do as much as we can with as many resources as we have at the present, so that we can build the organization slowly and not overpromise and underdeliver, if you know what I mean.
Understood. Well, tell me this. You said modest resources. How are you guys funded? And what kind of resources are you employing? Is it financial capital, human capital, political capital? What is it exactly that you're working with?
Mostly it's just human capital and ideas. Everything is, there really isn't any funding I know of other than his own personal funds that he's using to do whatever he needs to do to push the website out and any other materials that he's pushing out there. But a lot of it is just a lot of viral retweeting on Twitter. That's our biggest source of recruitment right now, is people on Twitter who are engaged and who are concerned for our country and for how things are going. And so, we get about, I don't know, maybe 75% of U.S. Freedom Army recruits from just tweets alone.
Now tell me this. What type of messages are you tweeting? I mean, is this a propaganda machine?
Some would call it that. Our enemies would call it that. But really what we're about is just pushing out there. Right now it seems like our focus is on saying, hey, we're just like you. We're outraged by what's happening in this country and how things are developing and how we're moving towards a more paternalistic state that wants to be involved in every decision of our lives. I mean, I don't know if you read the news article about this, but recently, a department somewhere, some bureaucracy within the government released an 80-page report talking about how it would be such a great idea to put shopping carts in stores. Each of these shopping carts, I think, were like $30,000, or maybe it was $30,000 for a batch. But these shopping carts would actually take note of what you put in the cart using barcodes or RFIDs or something like that,
Okay.
and it would tell you if you bought what the government approves for you to eat. And these are the kinds of things that we adamantly oppose. I mean, this makes no sense whatsoever. People should be able to be free to make their own decisions and about what they're going to do with their wealth and their income, and especially how much they're taxed. They should have some representation. There should be some fairness added to the tax problem. Just all these types of things that have piled upon us. But to more specifically answer your question, I can kind of go through the list of the main topics that we're concerned about. Number one is limiting the powers of federal government. Our founders never envisioned an overpowering federal government. The Constitution was written to be a limiting factor on big government and basically say what shall not be done by government, and the rest is left to the individuals and the states. So we're about limited powers and preventing an excess of centralized power, always what leads to a dictatorship.
Okay, but now when you say limiting power, where is it that you feel they've kind of extended their authority? Because having a shopping cart that indicates whether or not what you put in it is consistent with what the government deems to be healthy is not really taking away from you any fundamental authority or power that you have. It's not forcing you to do anything. It's simply collecting data and giving information.
Right. Well, I think where we object to that, I mean, if the free market says, yeah, we want that, that's something great for sure. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm kind of a von Mises Institute kind of guy where if the free market calls for it, great. I don't see the free market calling for that, but what I do see is taxpayer dollars being spent to fund these ridiculous studies to figure out how can we measure and spy on whatever Americans eat. So what I think we're talking about here is just the overtaxation and the underrepresentation, the kind of the far-reaching powers of taxation turning into control, if you will.
Okay, but now, do you think that taxpayer dollars should be spent on studies to determine whether or not the citizenry is making healthy choices?
Personally, this is just me speaking. No, I don't think the federal government has any business in that.
Okay. Okay. So you think that's an individual mandate to do?
I do. I'm just old enough to remember, what it was like when you just go to the store and buy whatever you want, and there were no labels on anything. Now, one would argue, oh well, how's that healthy? There could be anything in there. But at the same time, I didn't have to worry about a barcode scanner sending something to the federal government saying, here's what this guy's eating.
Okay,
so it was, yeah. I mean, if they
anonymize the information, this is what the people who who are arguing with you would say. If they anonymize the information, why do you care what information the government has?
Well, I think we both know. I know you're arguing the devil's advocate portion of this, but I think we both know that there's no such thing as anonymization of information. The Snowden, the whole Snowden thing that just went down with the NSA and him, revealing how much the NSA does collect on American citizens. I think right there is a smoking gun as to why we should be suspicious and why we should want to take back the reins of government and pare it back to its original intent.
Okay, but so we're suspicious.
Yeah. And
government finds out that I buy, peanut butter jelly every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Right, peanut butter and jelly. Again, how does that affect me as a citizen? How does that affect me? What does government do with that information?
Well, obviously, one thing that government can do is note something on your Obamacare, registry or whatever it is, their dossier that they're building on you, and saying, well, this person eats, 3 jars of peanut butter a week. That's not healthy, and so he's probably a candidate for some kind of a health heart study or something that we, or maybe we pump up his rates because his heart just can't be healthy with that much peanut butter, and they don't know the individual circumstances of what I'm doing with that peanut butter. I could be giving it to neighbors who are hungry,
Okay.
And there's all kinds of slippery slope problems that come with too much government involvement in an individual's personal choices.
Right. So you're saying the centralization of information and services creates a very dangerous combination.
Well, I would say not just the centralization, but also the governmentization, where you start having businesses that are joining forces with government. A lot of people talk about separation of church and state. I'm actually more for separation of business and state, because a lot of harm can be done with a business taking money or doing favors for, taking money from or doing favors for government under the guise of free enterprise. Because when the government is saying to a business, this is the way we want things done, and the business says, oh sure, and what will you give us? Oh, we'll give you tax breaks. Anything is possible. That they, anything could happen.
Rob, you've made some comments about the kind of the linkages between government and business, but you haven't said anything yet that scares me. I mean, you haven't said anything that says, oh wow, I should really be concerned.
All right.
We'll come back to that. Let's go on to another issue.
Sure.
So the government is doing all these things that you believe are encroaching upon, or that the U.S. Freedom Army believes encroaching upon the liberty of its citizens.
Yeah.
What is it that you guys do to combat that?
Right now, we are in the recruiting stage. So we have not yet defined our full, I guess you would say, strategy for our 5-part plan or whatever you want to call it. Right now, we are just trying to make awareness that yes, there is a grassroots organization out there made of regular citizens who are just as concerned as you are. I like to say we're like the man and woman scouts. There's the Boy Scouts of America, and then when you grow up and graduate from high school, you join, for example, the United States Freedom Army, and you become a concerned citizen. Everything we're doing, when people hear the word Freedom Army, they think, oh my gosh, you guys are like those separatists in whatever third world country, and you're going to be running around with your AK-47s and shooting up the place. No. It has nothing to do with that.
Well, it does say Army. I mean,
it does say Army, yeah.
Army.
And I'll get to that in a second. But it's more in a deference to our military, to say we support the military, we love our military members and what they're doing. We especially love our oath keepers who have promised not to fire on American citizens should something happen and martial law is declared, whatever. But the main thing is that we are an organized group of people, and we just happen to prefer the discipline and the forthrightness of a military command structure. Eventually, we would like to, kind of like the Salvation Army has captains and sergeants and all that kind of thing. We would kind of like to go down that route as well and say, here are the people who you report to. Your duties are defined. They're 100% vetted, and it's very clear what each person is responsible for doing. Because a lot of what we've seen in the Tea Party groups is that you have these power struggles, and nobody really has a clear definition of what they do and who they are. These groups split up, they faction off, they do their own things, and nothing gets done. So we want that operational efficiency that comes with identifying with kind of a military command structure. You have a captain and you have a sergeant, you have a lieutenant, and so on and so forth. I'm not military. I wanted to join the military. They wouldn't accept me for health reasons. But and I'm not doing this just because I'm trying to run my little fantasy game of military. It made sense to me that you would want a group that is organized in the efficient ways that our military has been in the past.
Okay, so who's the Supreme Commander?
We don't have anything like that yet. That's the thing, is right now we just have the name, and we're just recruiting. We're just saying, hey, come join us. The organization is growing. Help us grow it. Here's our initial ideals. Everybody will have input. This is just our first year. I mean, it just started like December, January timeframe. So we're still gathering members.
How big is this organization, Rob?
Well, we don't share the numbers because we find that there's a strategic advantage, much like in the military, of not revealing your strength to the quote unquote enemy or the opposition.
Thousands? Are you tens of thousands?
Well, yeah, even I don't know that, but I am able to say that we do put out a regular report, and that report comes out monthly, and it talks about numbers in terms of percentages. And we have right now, I'm just going to pull up the latest one here on my screen.
Okay. Rob, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'll just throw it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I'll just throw out some numbers. Not surprisingly, Texas leads us in total recruits. 10.1% of all our recruits come from Texas.
Okay.
Following Texas, surprisingly, is California with 7.8%. Following them is Florida at 7.5%, North Carolina 4, Georgia is also 4, Ohio 3, New York 3, and Tennessee 3. Um, State population for states with over 2 million people in population, the top 8 are Mississippi, Alabama, especially in June, South Carolina, Oregon, Tennessee. I mean, we're
I,
literally in every
I
single
think
state.
that's all public information that you guys put on a newsletter,
Yes.
correct?
That
Okay.
is public information. When you register to join U.S. Freedom Army, we do put this out there. There's nothing stopping anyone from posting this on a blog or anything like that. In fact, we would kind of encourage it just to kind of help move things along. But when you join, you get this monthly newsletter to see what is coming, what's next, what are the plans for this month, next month, 6 months, 8 months, and so on. What are we doing on Constitution Day? There's a big event for that, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Now, do you have any specific goals in terms of numbers that you all are trying to hit that would give kind of an idea whether or not
Mhm.
you've kind of, hit this critical mass number or not?
I would not be privy to those numbers at this time. You would need to talk to the founder, Louis Shoup. But I know that there are goals, and that we, in some cases, exceeding them, which is great. Uh, from knowing the founder, he's a very modest type of guy. He doesn't want to jump in to something, with over-promising and under-delivering. So, it seems like he's approaching this from a very rational frame of mind.
So what's the political involvement? I mean,
Hmm.
I see you're organizing people.
Hmm.
I kind of related yourself to the Tea Party. What are you guys doing on the political standpoint in regards to your message and your initiatives?
On the political standpoint, right now we are planning an event in September, September 17th, which is Constitution Day, um, in Washington. It's not going to be anything like Operation American Freedom, and it's the last time I'll ever use that phrase because it was a complete disaster.
What was
Um,
tell me about Operation American Freedom.
well, I don't really know that much about it, but it was an organization that essentially said we're going to have 10 million people in Washington D.C. and that was the first sign that it was going to fail was because they promised a number that nobody could ever pin down. How do you know you're going to get 10 million people there?
Hmm.
So we kind of observed how that went down, and we learned a lot of valuable information on how not to do grassroots organizing. I mean, we laud them for having tried so hard and for their optimism. That was great. Having 10 million people, I think, would be overwhelming for Washington. We hope to have that many people, but we're not going to promise that or say that that's what's going to happen. But we are hoping to get as many people as can come. Is pretty much what we're saying. If you can come, great. If you can't, stay in your local community. Hand out our flyers there and educate people as much as you can where you are. Because,
So you're gonna go to Washington D.C.
mm-hmm,
and you're gonna bring as many people as you can,
mm-hmm,
and you're gonna go and you're gonna ask for what? Because right now what you're talking about is
mm-hmm,
we want federal government to be limited in its power.
right,
There has to be a demand that you're making. Otherwise, it's
right,
impossible to meet your
of
objective.
course, right,
What's the
and yeah, so the flyer that we're passing around lists our demand. It's a one-page list of demands, and they are reasonable demands. They are the same demands that our founding fathers felt so strongly about. The first one is limited powers, not so much power to the federal government, and that includes taxation under Article 1, Section 8. Number two, separation of powers is important because we have seen kind of a conglomeration of executive orders and all of these maneuvers in the Senate and the House that have nothing to do with the Constitution and everything to do with just plain political expediency, and that's not constitutional. We're talking about the management of the money supply. To coin money literally means to have metal, some kind of precious metal that backs up your coin. Otherwise, it's worthless, and you have hyperinflation. You just print money to print money, and it eventually leads to fiscal disaster. We want to alert people to the problems with trying to limit our freedoms as far as the Second Amendment. There's everything in the Second Amendment stops the government from infringing on our rights, but we see this creep of regulations and little rules and things like that that have kind of made it impossible for me to drive from one town to another, for example, with a firearm in my car. In one town I can have a loaded firearm sitting next to me, in another town I can't. And these are all kind of gotcha rules that are unconstitutional. The last one is
You want the government to abolish gun control. Is that what you want? I mean, you want everybody to be able to carry a weapon?
My personal beliefs on this are, and I realize that even in the conservative spectrum, there are a lot of differing ideas. Okay, some people are for universal background checks, other people are for just plain open carry everywhere. I see problems and issues with both sides, but what I'm getting at is that the federal government does not have the right to tell me that I cannot own a certain type of firearm, or that I cannot own a firearm, period. Okay, that is enshrined in the Constitution, and we can haggle back and forth about where the commas go and things like that about militia and all that kind of stuff, but I'm telling you right now, there are a variety of good arguments out there that say it means what it says, that citizens are allowed to have and carry weapons, and they are allowed to protect themselves both in their homes, and as in that McDonald case in Chicago, and on the streets, and doing everything they can to protect themselves and their families. And anything else beyond that is constitutional overreach.
Okay, so let's say you go to D.C. There, you set out your list of demands, which I believe you can see on the screen, correct?
Yes. Yep, I see it there.
So you see, you put out your list of demands, and they say, you know what? We hear you. They send out the police to kind of barricade you off and kind of slowly push you back away from whatever building it is you're standing in front of. And then they tell you, oh, and by the way, we're not going to repeal gun control. Mm-hmm. You don't have a right to bear arms. So just go on home and kind of accept it. What does the Freedom Army do next? The U.S. Freedom Army do next?
Okay, this is going to be something that we would document so that we can go back to our representatives and say, okay, again, we're trying peacefully to fix our government. Here's what happened to us. Among all of the other people who have done this in the past and other organizations, it's happened to us as well. How many more times does this kind of thing have to happen before you will do something to limit the powers of the federal government over us and to put them back on a constitutional track? It's something that it's something we feel very passionate about in terms of trying to do things peacefully, get things done in a right and peaceful and lawful way. We believe in rule of law. So that's pretty much what we would do, and it's pretty much what any good citizen would do if they were awake. We know that there are people waking up all across the country. There's never been more quiet rage, I guess you could call it, than there has been up until now.
Quiet rage.
Yeah, just a quiet anger of, I'm so tired of hearing about my government telling me I can't do this or I can do that, or that I have to do that. I want it to go back to what it was. I want it to go back to a constitutional country and not a country of rule by fiat or judicial lawmaking from the bench.
So, Rob, how far do we have to go back to get back to where this was that you were talking about?
Well, I actually don't see it in terms of just rewinding the clock and repealing tons of amendments until we get back to, some people accuse us of wanting to go back to the days of slavery and making things just like they were in the 1700s. That's not it at all. I think that what we've done in this experiment that's never been done in the history of the world, I think what we've done is we've learned a lot of things, and we've gained a lot of things that are good. Slavery obviously was very wrong, and there were a lot of compromises, some necessary, some not necessary at all, and that should never have been made, that delayed the repealing of slavery. And I, for one, probably would have, if I were one of the founding fathers in that time, I would have been arguing vehemently against slavery. But a lot of people tend to treat the Constitution as something that the founders knew that they were going to be oppressing people for this many years or whatever. The founders, if you live in their time and you're not applying presentism, which is a history crime, if you're not applying presentism to the debate, you have to look at the world through their eyes and what was going on in their time. And when you read their writings and you see what they had to say about slavery and the terrible things that they wanted to fix in the world and how little power they really had to make those changes on an individual choice basis, then you begin to understand, okay, the Founding Fathers, flawed as they were, they did the best they could. Great. So now we are, over 200 years later, we have all of these changes to the Constitution, some of them great, most of them and a few of them really, really bad. So what we would like to see is a mindset change in Washington, D.C., where politicians start to say, okay, the 16th Amendment, for example.
But Rob, before we go there, Rob, give me 1 second. I want to kind of touch on one of the things you said.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we have to be clear that when we say Founding Fathers were trying to abolish this, you have to acknowledge that some Founding Fathers wanted to abolish it, some wanted to maintain the status quo.
I understand. Yep, that's what I was referring to.
So we're talking about some of the Founding Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, this institution that we refer to as slavery, and you have to realize that, and I'm sure you know this, that at some point you're going to be called a racist organization.
Of course, we already have been.
Yeah, you're going to be called a racist organization. It's going to be said that it's because we have a black president. It's because you don't like Barack Obama. First time a black guy gets in office, you're now raising an army to overthrow the government because you can't stand it.
Right.
So, I mean, tell me what you racists think about that.
Well, first of all, I would say, Allen West is an awesome person, and I would love to see him as my president. There are dozens of black people, hundreds of them.
So you have a black guy. You have a black guy that you'd be willing to invite to dinner. Okay, Alan Keyes or Allen West, whoever that is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me why you're not a racist organization, right?
Okay. Well, why are we not a racist organization? Well, I can't answer for every single person in the organization, and I know there are people who are interested in joining our organization, and I've actually called them out on Twitter when people start to throw out racial epithets and stuff. I say, hey, knock it off. That's not who we are. And they, I joined, and you're supposed to be a big tent. Why can't I be a Nazi skinhead supremacist? And I just tell them right up front, we need everybody. We need everybody, black, white, Asian, Indian, whoever they are, wherever they're from. If they have come here and are American citizens and dedicated to the ideal of the American life, the American dream, the American society, then they are part of us. But if you're going to discriminate on any of those bases, then we don't want to have anything to do with you.
Do you have a code of racial conduct? I mean, I looked at your website. I didn't see anything about not allowing skinheads or racist element into the organization.
Well, I think that's more of an assumption on our part that it should go without saying that slavery is wrong and racism is wrong and all of those things are wrong. Perhaps you're right. Maybe we should have some kind of a statement as to who we consider to be persona non grata as far as trying to push, because we understand how organizations work, and that you always get infiltrated by people who are marginal, kind of agents provocateur, or people who are just not part of the core ideal. That happens in every organization, no matter where you are or what you're doing. So I don't know. That's a good question, and it's something that we would hope that our members of our organization would help us fix.
We'll address that later. I know that you personally, I think you've adopted some mixed race children of your own. So I think that speaks a lot about your integrity as a person, and I think it puts you somewhat beyond reproach. So I know you wouldn't say that, so I wanted to put that out there because I know this about you. But I'm definitely not attacking the organization on the racist side, but you do know that's going to come up. What about immigration? What about illegal immigrants? What is the U.S. Freedom Army's stance on illegal immigration?
Our stance on illegal immigration is that illegal immigration is illegal. Plain and simple, a country is defined by its borders, its language, and its culture. And if you don't have the ability to defend your borders from terrorists, for example, who are definitely been documented 100 times that terrorists are using our lax immigration policy to come across our borders. If you're not able to protect your borders, then you are no longer a nation as defined by what the common consensus is. And so what are you at that point? You become some amorphous entity that is not definable or defendable. So I would say that if somebody is coming here legally, they're waiting in line and I understand the process is enormously difficult. I would love to see that change. It's yet another display of big government getting in the way of good things. But if you're standing in line doing the right things and somebody jumps ahead of you in line, I mean, we wouldn't stand for that in the cafeteria. Why would we stand for that on our borders? We want people to come to our country. That's what's made us great. But what we don't want is just anybody coming here without knowing who they are and knowing that they're not here to do damage.
Okay, so, but you guys aren't sitting out in front of buses, preventing them from performing the immigration function of moving people to different places while they wait for their day in court to determine whether or not they're able to stay here.
I don't have personal knowledge of any U.S. Freedom Army anybody being in front of buses right now. I personally I have kind of applauded people who will not allow these MS-13 gangs and these people they're calling children, which some of them are full-grown men with tattoos and just all kinds of just stuff going on. I mean, not against people with tattoos, but I mean, you see these tattoos and it's very clear where their alliances are. They are, La Raza and some of these.
Certainly. But do you think that's a conspiracy? Do you think the government is trying to cover up something that they're allowing? Do you think that the quote-unquote Muslim president that everybody is talking about is somehow trying to lower the standard in America? I mean, what is it? What do you think that is? I mean, because we're talking about these concepts, these theories, government's expanding power. For what reason? To accomplish what goal, what objective, and what aim?
Well, again, I'm just an everyday citizen. I don't have access to information that could tell me either way. I have lots of. I read a lot. I read both sides of things. I obviously have my own political persuasions. Speaking as myself and not as a representative of any organization at all. I do believe that there is some kind of a political game going on here, and I believe strongly that it has something to do with elections, in terms of importing the votes that this beleaguered and embattled presidency is going to need to transfer power to the next democratic regime. So I think, and when I say democratic, I mean that very loosely, because it's anything but. But I think there is something going on here where Obama is just kind of throwing his hands up in the air and saying, "Well, what can I do? I'm just the president." Well, we obviously know what he can do, but is he going to do it? No. Then we have to ask the question: why isn't he doing that? What does he have to gain from not acting? And that opens up a whole avenue of questioning that, frankly, the media and the power elites are not asking.
So, Rob, do you guys want to see this government dissolved or restrained? Which one is it? What's the preference?
Absolutely, I want to see it restrained. I think dissolving the government is a very dangerous thing in any case. In any country, I've been to countries, I've lived in countries for a long period of time where governments were dissolved at the drop of a hat. All that happens is good citizens get killed, because you get militants that get in there and they all have their own agendas, and there's chaos and anarchy. I have problems with my anarchist Twitter friends. There's chaos, there's anarchy, there's no, nature abhors a vacuum. And so when you create that vacuum through, completely dissolving a government without a plan in place to put something in its place, then you reap what you sow. I would love to see us just go back to what the Constitution prescribes about restraining federal power. Restraining federal power, I think, is, if you wanted to ask us what are the three words that describe the mission of the U.S. Freedom Army, it's restraining federal power. We want to put us back on the right road. This ship is leaning. Some people say to the right, some people say to the left. I say to the left. But a ship that's leaning is about to sink, and so we need to upright the ship and make things balanced again. And I feel very strongly that U.S. Freedom Army is capable of doing that.
I find something interesting. The whole intent behind the U.S. Freedom Army is to kind of push back these restraints on liberties that have kind of been taken away by the expansion of the federal government. Mm-hmm. But this is kind of the same situation that freed Negro slaves found themselves in definitely in the South after emancipation, and quite possibly in the North. I'm not sure, but there's definitely a lot of history of that in the South, where the black codes were written in order to limit and restrain their abilities. And actually, I wrote a book on this, 45 Minutes to Freedom. But actually, it was that condition that has led to what I believe to be the present day environment, where now everyday ordinary Americans are seeing old tools used to suppress the free Negro slaves to now suppress the American populace as a whole, indiscriminate of race,
Right.
indiscriminate of color, indiscriminate of, in a lot of cases, economic background.
Right. Well, I think when you mentioned that these restraints, one of the things that popped into my head immediately was political correctness. Um, it is a kind of a silent, quiet fascism that says that again, political correctness means different things to different people. If you say I'm politically correct as a Democrat or as a liberal or progressive or whatever you want to call yourself, you are describing a state of enlightenment where you are putting yourself above the inanities of the past, right? If you say those words as a Republican or a conservative or a constitutionist or whatever you want to call yourself, you are saying I'm fed up with filtering my speech all the time for everybody. Can we just go back to being adults? Can we just go back to being responsible for what we say? And if I say something that offends somebody, if I say something that offends you, Christopher, I want you to tell me. And tell me exactly what it is, and I will apologize if I've offended you. And I will apologize for saying that, not just if I've offended you. I will apologize for saying that because I know it offends you, and I want to be your friend, and I want you to be my friend, right?
Right.
But I just want us to go back to having choices again. I want us to have choices as to how we conduct our daily lives that are not constantly infringed or spied upon or anything by the federal government.
So let's try to think of a scenario where the federal government spying upon you could create disastrous consequences. Let me throw one out there. Federal government tracks your movements via your cell phone, and they combine that with your bank accounts. So they see that every Thursday you go to a specific location, and then 2 hours later you go to the bank and you make a $15,000 deposit in cash, right? So now some unscrupulous government employee, because this happens, government employees aren't the best paid people in the world, so they look for other opportunities.
Of course.
So a unscrupulous government employee somehow digs that information out and sends it to a buddy of theirs and said, hey, look, man, let me tell you something. This guy goes to this location. I don't know what he does every Thursday at 3 o'clock, and 2 hours later he goes to the bank and makes a $15,000 deposit. What a wonderful time to rob him. Just what happened, right? That's an example of your information being acquired by government, being contained in a centralized database, and then being used against you. So now you're sitting here, you get robbed, and they take your $15,000 away from you that you were going to deposit in the bank 30 minutes later.
Right.
You have no idea where that came from.
Right.
No way to track it, no way to trace it.
Right. Yeah, and I'm the type of person that I would not advertise that kind of information freely, so I would have to believe if that happened to me that somebody somewhere cheated and they got access to information that they shouldn't have had.
But how about even better than this, right? Instead of it being a robber that takes your money, you get pulled over by a police officer, right? Police officer pulls you over because the NSA, whatever agency, sent down a little report to the police officer that, well, we got some suspicious activity going on here. He goes here, he comes in for 2 hours later, puts $15,000. Police officer pulls you over, and then comes up with some reason to search your car, searches your car, and finds $15,000, and then says, oh, where did you get it from?
Yeah.
Initiates forfeiture proceedings. So now you're going through this huge court process where you have to go get an attorney who's going to take half if he gets your money back, right? Then you have to fight for it for 2-3 years in the civil forfeiture proceeding.
Right.
Tell them exactly where you got it from, right? All of this information gleaned off of the collection, the unauthorized collection of that information, right? There's been numerous cases where, in different parts of the country, especially here in Texas, where I happen to be right now, in Texas, where they have cities who made a living or funded pretty much their entire departments off of pulling people over, going through their cars, and seizing money, anything from $500 to $500 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right? And in Texas, you know, sometimes if you're a cattle rancher, you have a lot of cash because you're going to buy cattle, and they don't take checks.
Right.
Right. So you have legal justification for that money, but they would say, hey, look, either you give us this money, or we're going to file charges for money laundering against you. Right. And that was actually a federal case up in Tenaha where the feds had to come in and essentially say, okay, we got to shut this program down although they were the reason the program worked. Because the states, the city governments would then take the cash, send it to the feds, and then the feds would give them half,
Right.
and then the feds would keep half.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, they're. I think the message that people communicate, it has to be more than groceries in a basket. It has to be something that's actually happening,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't exactly know the origin of these things and why they're happening because, of course, unless Edward Snowden comes out and breaks his oath to keep all of their secrets that they're doing to us secret, we don't know. So it takes
Right.
an act of treason for us to find out how treasonous our government is.
Right.
I mean,
Isn't it ironic?
it's very ironic. An act of treason to figure out how treasonous our government is to its own people.
When it's illegal to find out how your government is committing crimes, then you know there's a problem.
Exactly. Exactly. And then we have a president who sits in the office and says, well, it's important for the collection of data on our system. And I'm not going to blame this just on Barack because I
Yeah,
think this goes way beyond that. I think
it does.
it's back to Bush, it's probably back to Clinton, it's probably every president that preceded him thought they could have, they looked at where the president previous to them went and they figured they could push the envelope a little bit further down the road.
Right.
Oh, well, Bush was collecting financial data. Oh, okay. Well, if he collected financial data, well, now maybe I can go and I can collect telephone data
Right.
and aggregate it. And then talk about this concept of anonymization. How do you anonymize information from somebody's private cell phone?
Right.
I mean, it becomes useless if you've taken off the number
Mm-hmm.
and the person attached to it. It's
Right.
now just phones moving around. What's the point of that data?
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't
Well, and
make
I happen to work in the IT field, and I work with IT security experts at my job, and we constantly talk about how much information the government really, really has, and we have an inside track. We know how technology works. That's the problem. Is I think technology has overrun our capability to understand it as a general populace, and I think the government sees that as the opportunity it needs to do exactly what you're talking about and jump in there and just take advantage of what we don't know about what we don't know. That telephone metadata is very valuable because it can be traced back to, not only to you, but to all the other people you know and all the people they know. So it's a cascade that it's really gotten out of control.
hmm Absolutely. And some people would say that we live in a snitch society.
Yeah, I would agree.
See something, say something, regardless of
Right.
whether it really is something or not.
Hmm.
Which governments now use as a justification to now go in and violate your privacy rights.
Hmm.
So, I think that society as a whole has kind of gotten to this mode of, okay, government intervention's good. We wouldn't be safe if we didn't have it. There's terrorists who are going to be on planes with shoe
Hmm.
bombs. I think we've sensationalized a lot of things in order to make them acceptable, and we've gotten to the point where, I don't know who my neighbor is, but I'm gonna tell on him if I think he's doing something that may be slightly inappropriate, even if I don't know what exactly it is that he's doing.
Hmm. Well, and
And now
the fact that you and I having this conversation right now can be used against us in a court of law eventually, if we even get that far. If some future government regime decides they want to dig up dirt on either of us, they can. All of this is recorded. It's we're using Google's service to do it.
oh,
All of it's recorded. It can be
it's
used against
recorded
us.
and it's broadcast to the world.
Yeah, and that's kind of our point, is we want the world to hear what we're saying. And so this is where you have that delicate balance between too much freedom and not enough freedom. Well, I would rather have too much freedom. Err on the side of liberty.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Here on the side of liberty, and when I want a conversation private, I want that conversation private,
absolutely.
regardless of whether or not somebody else values their privacy. I value
Right,
mine.
right.
I would like that to be respected.
Right. Well, and it goes back to that saying by Benjamin Franklin that a country that gives up a little liberty for a little security deserves neither, and it's true.
Exactly. Exactly. So I guess the real question is, how far is the U.S. Freedom Army willing to go? I mean, are they willing to stand on their Second Amendment rights and bear and use arms in the event that government goes too far?
Well, what we like to say is what we do depends on what Washington does.
hmm
If Washington plays by the rules, we play by the rules. Absolutely. And the last thing any of us ever wants to see is another civil war in this country. The last thing we want to see is open gunfire over political ideals in this country, right? We fought that in the Revolutionary War against the British. We didn't win. I mean, we didn't fully win until 1812 when we finally kicked them off the shores for good. But and then we had the bloody Civil War, and none of that is desired by anybody. I mean, I'm a student of history. I know how revolutions work. I know how these things come about, and it's ugly. I've lived in a country that was under civil war, and at the time that I was there, and it was scary. And it's not a situation I ever want to live in. So if I can do anything I can do to make things peaceful and do things peacefully and change our government peacefully, that is what I'm going to focus on. But I'm telling you right now, there are people in this country, whether they're affiliated with us or not, they are ready, should the time come and the conditions are clear, and that there is an impending danger over the liberties of men, that they will stand up and fight for their country. And a lot of them are our military.
Interesting. I'm going to share something with you.
Yeah.
It's a court case, Cohen v. Virginia, and it kind of touches on this issue.
Right.
Chief Justice Marshall, at the time, made the commentary. Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, and it's talking about what happens, like how can the people effectively dissolve their government, and it kind of gives you two options. The first one is if you use force, and it says, but should no appeal be made to force? The states can put an end to the government by refusing to act. They have only not senators, right?
Right.
And it expires without a struggle. It is very true that whenever hostility to the existing system shall become universal, it will be also irresistible. The people made the Constitution, and the people can unmake it. It is the creature of their will, and it lives only by their will. But this supreme and irresistible power to make or to unmake resides only in the whole body of the people, not in any subdivision of them. The attempt of any of the parts to exercise it is usurpation, and ought to be repelled by those to whom the people have dedicated their power of repealing it.
Exactly.
The acknowledged inability of the government then to sustain itself against the public will and, by force or otherwise, to control the whole nation is no sound argument in support of its constitutional inability to preserve itself against a section of the nation acting in opposition to the general will. It is true that if all the states, or a majority of them, refuse to elect senators, the legislative power of the Union will be suspended. But if any one state shall refuse to elect them, the Senate will not, on that account, be the less capable of performing all its functions. The argument founded on this fact would seem rather to prove the subordination of the parts of the whole than the complete independence of any of them. The framers of the Constitution were, indeed, unable to make any provision which should protect that instrument against the general combination of the states or of the people for its destruction. And conscious of this inability, they have not made the attempt, but they were able to provide against the operation of measures adopted in any one state whose tendency might be to arrest the execution of the laws. And this it was the part of true wisdom to attempt. What think they have attempted it. We think they have attempted it.
Right.
So, what we have here is essentially Chief Justice Marshall of the Supreme Court for the United States, essentially giving us the blueprint as to how when this government becomes unreasonable, by simply saying, you need to convince your state your state legislators and your state executive branch from appointing U.S. senators, and the government will cease to exist. It will dissolve itself. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think also we need to make a distinction, pardon me, that this statement is not about just not voting. It's not about, getting a coalition of citizens to just retract their vote and not vote at all. This is a state level operation you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah, it's something that everybody has to agree on, at least a clear majority, for their representatives to abstain from voting and to just dissolve. Yeah. Well, I'm not as familiar with this case law that you're talking about, so this is all kind of new to me. But I kind of like the idea that this is a peaceful protest. It's kind of an opt-out situation where you're saying none of this is pleasing to us. We're going to do something else, right?
Right. And I think it's a political mechanism
Hmm.
that if you continue to, I mean, U.S. Freedom Army, like you said, doesn't necessarily mean arms,
Hmm.
but we are Americans, and we
Right.
have an oath that we've made as Americans to protect and defend the Constitution.
That's
So
right.
if it comes to it, we will stand on our Second Amendment rights, is essentially what we're saying, correct? But
Exactly.
more importantly, is a political mechanism that soldiers of your army could help effect as well, which
Hmm.
is to somehow get some type of referendum or vote on the ballot that the state will not appoint senators in the event that these specific conditions are not adopted by the federal government,
Hmm.
and then give it a timeline, and
Right.
then ultimately the state would be in a position where it has to now not appoint senators, and if you can get the majority of states to do that,
Hmm.
pressure by the U.S. Freedom Army, right? I
Hmm.
think you have a great political mechanism. And if that doesn't work, then ultimately the government is run afoul and it's no longer our government anymore.
Hmm. Well, and this is what we're all about. Just what you're proposing here is one of many ideas that many of our members could have. And we're open to all kinds of ideas, especially ones that we think will work. I can't say whether or not that would work, but it sounds peaceful. It sounds like a way to just sit down and say, I'm taking my ball and I'm not going to play anymore. You know, I'm tired of this game of tyranny. I want to do something different. I have talked to some anarchists where that's one point we agree on, is where you have this huge body of millions of people being governed by these tiny little dots on the map of elites. And
Hmm.
at some point, that balance of power has to be normalized, where reality sets in, and we say, wait a minute, we surround you. You don't surround us. We surround you. We are in charge, not you. And
Right.
then as a people, a group, a body, not just a small faction of crazies out there, but everybody gets together and says, all right, you know what? We're ready to move past this, right? We're going to move out of the house. We're going to get our own jobs. We're
Right.
going to pay our own taxes. We're going to do our own thing here. And you people that have been ruling over us are no longer allowed. You're done.
Right.
Yeah. So
Is,
I think
is
we're on the
this
same
our
page.
government? Is this our government or is this our monarchy? You tell me.
Right. Right. Are you guys hall monitors, or are you just going to represent us? Which is it going to be?
Right. That's
Yeah.
right. Well, Rob Watson, I'd like to thank you for coming on the Common
Yeah.
Sense Corner today and letting us know what the U.S. Freedom Army is about.
Yeah.
I applaud you in what
Thank
you
you.
all are trying to do and get done in America. I think we need more people like you and your organization in order to galvanize the citizenry to actually take action in a very organized fashion and method.
Well, thank you.
Because
And I'd like to return that compliment and say I very much like what your website's about. At first, I was a little skeptical because I see a lot of websites like that. But when you and I talked, it sounds like you've got a straight head on your shoulders, and you're out there to fight for freedom and liberty for individuals. And I love that. I applaud that too.
thank you, Rob. That's what I'm all about. I'm all about getting the message out, and
Yep.
I think the Constitution still has a little bit of strength left in it.
Yep.
But if the methods that I teach on my website don't work, I can tell you that the Constitution is dead,
Yeah.
and there's not much more that we can do because it simply asks you to just enforce certain provisions.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So thanks again, Rob, for joining us today,
Thank
and
you.
we look forward to seeing you again on the Common Sense Corner.
Absolutely. We'd be glad to join again.
Wonderful. Thanks,
Thank you.
Rob. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
And that will be all today for the Common Sense Corner on July 20th. We'd like to again thank Rob Watson for joining us. And if you get the chance and the opportunity, you need to go by and you need to check out the U.S. Freedom Army, www.usfreedomarmy, USFREEDOMARMY.com. That's the USFreedomArmy.com. All right. Thank you for joining us again. Good day. Thank you.